Joining us on the program today is Bibek Debroy, member of the Niti Aayog. Mr. Debroy, thank you for joining us today. Looking at the economic survey, there obviously is an acknowledgement that growth is going to slow down as a result of demonetization. But some of the other figures that stand out, for instance, is that industrial growth is also sharply down from 7.4% in the previous financial year to 5.2%, although agricultural growth has grown because of the monsoon. Given that, and given that we already have worrying unemployment figures, how is the economy, you think, going to get back on track over the next several months?
Well, firstly, one should not link everything to whatever happened on the 8th of November, because some of the problems, they have been there for some time. Some of the problems pertaining to the agricultural sector, the problems with private investments, the problems with the banks, with the debts that the banks have. Now, these are problems. There have also been issues with the kind of jobs that have been created, the number of jobs that have been created. These cannot necessarily be solved in the short run by waving a magic wand. Now, obviously, therefore, there is a slightly medium-term strategy. This particular budget becomes important because it is happening against a certain institutional change that is going to occur. Part of it is the abolition of the planned, non-planned distinction, the subsuming of the railway budget in the general budget, the implications of the restructured centrally sponsored schemes, all of that stuff. Trade-off is what is going to happen to tax reform and whether, to what extent is the government going to spend on public investments which are often necessary to trigger private investments.
Mr. Debroy, you're right, of course, that there is no magic wand for things, as you rightly said, that were already happening to the economy before demonetization, which is why some people have questioned why demonetization was done. But my question is, where is the growth going to happen from? If the industrial growth figures are down, if the unemployment figures are where they are, where is this growth going to come from exactly?
Well, this is the second time you said where the unemployment figures are where they are. Now, the fact of the matter is that we do not have any robust estimates of unemployment, employment, job creation after 2011-12. That is the last year when we had a proper national sample survey which gives such figures. The next NSS is going to be in 2017-18.
There is a figure from the Labour Bureau,
let's leave that aside.
No, but there's a figure from the Labour Bureau from last year which says that in 2015-16, India's unemployment rate was at a 5-year high.
I use the word robust.
So you don't think that is particularly robust, not the Labour Bureau?
And the robust one is the large NSS surveys. But let's not quibble about that. That's not really the issue. The issue, to my mind, I can, for example, cite the CMI survey, which has a far larger sample survey. But that's not really the real issue. The real issue is that we do have a problem not just with the number of jobs that are being created, with the quality of the jobs that are being created, with a lack of skills, with the fact that people who have invested within quotes in education are no longer willing to work in the traditional occupations, including agriculture, for the kinds of wages they used to earn earlier. In other words, there's also been a voluntarily opting out of the labor force. But the answer to your question is most of this growth is not going to come. You use the word industry. I would prefer to use the word manufacturing, because sometimes when people use the word industry, what they really mean is manufacturing. Classic manufacturing is somewhat capital intensive. So the vast increase in jobs is not going to happen from that narrow manufacturing, but will happen from the services sector, and many of those services sector are associated with reforming agriculture, including the commercialization and diversification of agriculture.
There's been encouraging news on agriculture, certainly, and that's there in the economic survey. You were talking about robust data. There's also the United Nations Labour Organization report that just came out a few days ago. That is also talking about job stagnation in India over the course of the next couple of years. But, let me ask you also, Mr. Debroy, on the question of, the GDP numbers and the informal sector of the economy. And there's an acknowledgement in the survey that the short-term costs have taken the form of inconvenience and hardship, particularly in the informal and cash incentive sectors, and that these costs are transitory and may be minimized in the recorded GDP because you don't really take into account the informal sector. Does that make us believe that if one were to take this into account, that the growth figures would be a little more negative than what they are right now?
Not at all, because this is where people mix up. And economic survey does not mix up, but sometimes people mix up economic activity from GDP. GDP, or to be more accurate, its gross value added, is value added. Now, a lot of people are fixated only on the value of output, but in the numerator, you have the net. When the value of the output comes down, the value of the input also may have come down. And therefore, in net terms, what happens, we do not know. Real estate, for example, what prices have dropped? Is it the registered value, or is it the so-called black value, which is not reflected in the registered price in any case? What about the denominator? Because we are talking about real growth, not nominal. The denominator is some reflection of prices. Now, if prices have come down, as many people have tended to suggest, I do not really know what has been the impact. If one is going to accept the proposition floating around in the media that a lot of companies have laundered money, that is going to now show up somewhere. Where is it going to show up? It's going to show up on other income. Now, these are various reasons why it is somewhat hazardous to stick out one's neck and say what the impact is going to be on GDP or GVA growth in terms of precise numbers. It is one thing to say that the numbers will be affected in Q3 and Q4, and the 7.1% figure that economic survey talks about is not for the entire financial year. It's a completely different thing to say that X% reduction will happen in GDP or GVA growth.
How do you react to the criticism, though, leveled by former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and former Finance Minister Mr. Chidambaram, who who have actually said yesterday that the government is exaggerating the economic data, that you're presenting a rosier picture than actually exists, what some would call WhatsApp GDP versus the real GDP?
The GDP figures are produced by CSO. The change in the methodology, which some people have criticized, was accepted in 2008. In other words, those revisions in national income accounting came about when both Mr. Chidambaram and Dr. Manmohan Singh were part of the government.
Okay, so you're saying that it's hypocritical for them to then question that data now?
I did not use that word. I said that in many things there is a certain continuity, and several experts groups had gone into the change in the methodology, and therefore it is not quite the case that suddenly overnight one decided to revise the way national income accounts, particularly on GDP, were constructed.